Colossal
Colossal Russian attack. Once again, the Russian armed forces carried out a brutal combined air assault against Ukraine. According to Ukrainian authorities themselves, the air offensive involved the launch of 476 drones and 84 missiles, both ballistic and cruise. The Russian attack represents a severe blow to Ukraine's military capability, whose president, Volodymyr Zelensky, was touring Europe at the time of the strikes. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from Berlin, Germany. With a terrible hoarseness and a very strained voice, we begin the 292nd live broadcast of Demolishing Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and please remember to help us out with a thumbs up, comments, subscriptions, and, for those who can, with the memberships, through PayPal as well. We're always sincerely grateful to all of you. Joining us on the other side of the screen and on the other side of Spain, surely with better weather, much less rain, much less cold, and much more sun than here in Berlin, is Mr. Fernando Moragón. Fernando, how's everything over there?
El señor Fernando Moragón. Fernando, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Bien, a ver, para que tengamos un mejor clima que en Berlín.
Well, let's see. For us to have better weather than in Berlin, that's easy. It is what it is. The political climate, well, that's another matter. Debatable. But anyway, the first thing to do is I ask the viewers to vote, to debate, to discuss whether Ezequiel's hoarseness actually gives his voice more presence. I think the hoarseness suits him, and in fact, I was suggesting to him before going on air that he should just keep the hoarseness forever. I mean, because it gives him, I don't know, a kind of Lord Byron touch, a deep voice. So let's debate, let's vote. Let's vote on whether we want Ezequiel to get rid of the hoarseness or keep it. That's to start with. That said, let's see. Indeed, we had Mr. Zelensky touring around Europe and so on. And among other things, just so we can see the surrealism of Europe. Europe has reached a point where it can't even be described. Well, even in Spain, he met with the king. The king lately has been going through a phase between meeting with that neo-Nazi guy and with the head chopper who rules Syria, Al-Giuliani. He's putting together quite the photo album. That said, he was here. And what does little Pedro Sanchez come up with? I don't know if it was deliberate or just the usual clumsiness that characterizes Spanish politicians. So he says, "No, I have nothing to do with this man. I'm taking him to the Reina Sofia Museum." So far, so good. And I show him, well, we're not going to see the whole museum and all that because it's a drag and whatever, and this man isn't really up for museums. But I take him to the star painting of the Reina Sofia Museum, which is Picasso's Guernica. Of course, it's an anti-fascist work that criticizes the bombing of Guernica by the German Air Force. And besides, Picasso was a communist militant and received the USSR Peace Medal in 1950. This is insane. I mean, you see them over there in the back and you say, oh, look how nice and so on. Well, no, this bull represents bullfighting, right? That they're bombing him. This should have been told to little Sanchez, right? And so on. And look, what a beautiful painting and all that. I don't know, it's in black and white because at some point color television didn't exist. I don't know, any of those silly things. Well, that's it. This is the height of absurdity, isn't it? Anyway, there you have His Excellency, little Pedro Sanchez, looking at the painting of the horror of the bombings of Guernica, carried out by his kindred ancestors, that is, by those to whom the current Mr. Zelensky pays homage. Well, that's where we are, in Europe. And indeed, while Zelensky is here, visiting museums, back in his country in Ukraine, things are looking bad for Zelensky and for Ukraine, for both.
Fernando, how are you? Yes, we'll start like this. First, I'll present, with this little bit of voice I have left, something about the latest Russian airstrike. From there, we'll go over the front with your analysis, especially the situation in Seversk, which hasn't been published anywhere, even though practically half of Seversk changed hands overnight. So, however you prefer, take it easy on your own.
Pokrovsk still isn't a Minograd. According to the Ukrainians, Pokrovsk hasn't been taken yet. Based on that, well, it's still alive. In other words, we made it all up.
Comrades, I'll start very quickly with the map and some of the issues related to the colossal air attack carried out in the early hours of yesterday. In total, 524 attacks, of which 476 were with drones and 84 with missiles, mostly Kh-101s, Russia's most common subsonic cruise missiles, but also Iskander-M missiles, 7 calibers, and various other types of missiles. I might be remembering wrong, but there may have been a Kinzhal or two as well. An enormous number of missiles. Yes. Well. And this time, interestingly, the focus of the attacks appeared, unlike the last time a week ago, when the Russians mainly struck from the Dnipro to the right, from the Dnipro River westward. This time the focus appeared mainly from the Dnipro to the east, and this time from the Dnipro to the west. The Russians focused on the critical infrastructure of the provinces of Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, and Vinnytsia, as seen here on the left side of the map. The city of Ternopil, the city of Lviv, and the city of Ivano-Frankivsk, all capitals of their respective oblasts, were attacked mostly with drones, but also with missiles. The smaller attacks, those on the right bank of the Dnipro River in eastern Ukraine, were carried out in Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk, but this time targeting ammunition depots and other military concentrations, not critical infrastructure, as the Russians have usually done since they began these large-scale airstrikes aimed at wearing down Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Very quickly, some images, for example here, tremendous strikes against Ternopil, air attacks.
Tremendous image. 7 of them go down there in a row.
It's a Kh-101, right? Yes.
There at least, they got hit with 7 in a row.
These Brazilian decoys are interesting, Fernando. Yes, now.
More modest, so to speak. The least complex, the most economical of the missiles, and yet equipped with decoy systems. Indeed, it has been modernized and now includes this mechanism for launching decoys right when they are already directly attacking the target. As for what you were saying, for example, what I have here, missiles launched, at least 24 Kh-101s from the Tu-160, the famous White Swan, another 24 Kh-101s from the Tu-95. So, that's already at least 48. 6 calibers launched from a frigate and 4 calibers launched from a submarine. 3 Kh-22s, a smaller missile also launched, at least 1 Iskander, an Iskander-M, and somewhere I saw mention of several Kinzhal missiles, definitely more than 5. And among the known sites that were attacked are gas infrastructures in Poltava and power stations in Lviv, which have also been targeted. Some large warehouses were attacked. There they are, warehouses that were being used as logistics platforms, and everything coming in from Poland arrived here at these centers and was then distributed to the rest toward the front in the eastern zone. Well, these have bbeen crushed. And then also, for example, I'm seeing in Ivano-Frankivsk, which is also in the western area, west of the Dnieper. Well, there too, they've hit thermal plants, that is, power plants, thermoelectric ones and so on. In other words, in general, they've continued attacking electrical infrastructure, some logistics sites, the gas depots in Lviv or around Lviv. So they're pounding. This is impressive. Those aren't clouds, gray clouds that mean it's going to rain. That's the column of smoke that was generated. Look. So, well, quite a hectic night. It's said that in total they've launched, for example, more than 400-something drones.
476, according to Ukrainian authorities.
It was probably more. But anyway, yeah, it's been quite a hectic night, practically every other night now. We're having these tougher nights, so to speak, with lots of missiles and lots of drones constantly pounding the energy infrastructure. And we're going to keep seeing more and more of this, as the Ukrainians find themselves in an increasingly desperate situation, not really knowing what to do anymore, and basically in panic mode. It has to be said. When you read Ukrainian sources and Ukrainian bloggers, even the most patriotic ones, they're all in panic mode because they see that this is over. I mean, even our dear friend, who deep down isn't the most radical by far, Julian Roque, or whatever his name is already saying that this is lost and that it's a disaster in a defeatist tone. In other words, the situation is extremely serious. Now we'll do a quick review of the map, mainly pointing out the main developments and how this is moving much faster than what we've seen so far, and it's only going to speed up even more.
And winter hasn't started yet, Fernando? No, we're in autumn.
We're in autumn, we're in November. Winter starts, I always get confused, on December 21st or 22. So that would leave those days in December plus January, February, and March until around March 22nd. That is the hard part. It's going to be terrible. But look, given what we've seen so far, and with quite a bit of November still ahead of us, we could easily reach the end of November or the very beginning of December with a solid list of Ukrainian cities of some importance that have fallen into Russian hands, just like that. Because things are really bad. Indeed, it might sound exaggerated, but this coming winter, Fernando, could even determine the end of the war. Careful, I'm not ruling it out at all, because it's not only the military structure that's collapsing, but also the political one. Let's not forget that while Zelensky was here visiting museums, he's got a mess back home with the corruption issue, where ministers are falling like dominoes. They're going down one after another, and people are already calling for the head of his strongman, the one who really holds power, which is Yermak. Andriy Yermak, his chief of staff, the strongman of Ukraine, and they're already demanding his head, because all of Zelensky's buddies are involved in the corruption. Watch out, because let's not forget, this is an American maneuver, and therefore they've decided to take this step because they already plan to replace Zelensky with someone else.
The news today, Fernando, is the direct accusation against Yermak. If Yermak falls, Zelensky is next on the list, immediately after, because Yermak is his right-hand man. It's no longer about someone close to Zelensky, but about his trusted man. Of the three main accused, one, if I remember correctly, left Ukraine for Israel, another went first to Turkey and then to Qatar, where he is now, and the third, from what I read today, also fled Ukraine, though I don't recall exactly where, but somewhere around there. So the three main accused are on the run, and then there are ministers resigning one after another. The situation is tremendous.
So, well, as I said, there isn't a day that goes by without some new side effect and someone else getting caught up in this whole scandal, which, I insist, was brought to light by the Americans and will probably mean the end of Zelensky, and they'll put someone else in to negotiate peace, plain and simple. But to negotiate peace, not in terms that we understand as negotiating between equals, no. Simply to accept Russia's conditions, just like that. That is, look, these are Russia's conditions. Sign here. You have to sign it. So sign here and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. Basically for that. And besides, this works out very well for Trump, so that when the time comes, he can say, well, this has gone as far as it can go. The ones in full-blown panic mode are the American warmongers, both non-Trumpist Democrats and Republicans, and the Europeans. The Europeans right now have no idea what to do, because, on top of that, they've run out of money. They're lost. Von der Leyen is currently in full beggar mode, going on an electronic pilgrimage, sending emails and everything, talking to one president after another, trying to see what money she can scrape together. Hey look, no, we don't have any. Well, then you put in 2 million euros, or a billion or two, or maybe 2 billion. Let that country chip in, because that's where we're at. That's where the whole idea of stealing the frozen Russian assets in Europe comes from, which are mostly in Belgium. And they've said, not a chance, not even drunk, that's off limits.
Fernando, before presenting the map, just a second. Since we've started, a brief comment on Zelensky's situation and how this accusation relates to the United States. A Ukrainian newspaper, the Ukrainian Press, is reporting the following. Apparently, tomorrow, while Zelensky is still in Turkey, because Zelensky is traveling around Europe, Vitkov will hold a meeting with him there, in which he will present a peace plan proposed by the United States, involving major territorial concessions from Ukraine as part of the proposal. A plan that is supposedly optional, but in reality, not so much for the Ukrainian government. The publication, from just a little while ago, says the following in Spanish. The United States tells Zelensky that Ukraine must accept the peace plan, reports Reuters. According to two anonymous sources cited by Reuters, the plan would involve Ukraine giving up territory and weapons, as well as reducing the size of its armed forces. Reuters reported on Wednesday that the United States has asked President Zelensky to accept a peace plan that would entail relinquishing part of the territory and weapons, as well as downsizing the armed forces. According to what has been read elsewhere, this plan would involve handing over Donetsk and, naturally, also Luhansk, freezing the front line in Kherson and Zaporizhia, and Russia pulling back in Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv. This is one of the options we once discussed here with you, Fernando. At the time, you'll remember. First, Zelensky would have to approve it, and then Russia would have to approve it.
Which won't be the case, but anyway. Look, this is about slowly feeding the Ukrainians fuel, so they start accepting something outrageous. So they start accepting defeat. Then, well, next time they'll put it like this. No, but you also have to withdraw from the front line, as the Russians want, and also from the territories you occupy in Zaporizhia and Kherson. Next time it'll be, in addition to that, you have to give up what the Russians already hold in Dnipropetrovsk, in Kharkiv, in other places, until in the end, everything is imposed. They've already introduced the idea that they have to reduce their army. The next thing will be, and you also have to denazify. And in the end, well, what we all already knew, you're not going to be in NATO, so why pretend otherwise? I mean, this is a progressive, swallow it or leave it situation, knowing that the Russians hold all the cards. But look, what you were saying is very interesting, because how bad must things be that there were rumors Witkoff, that special envoy of Trump and all, was going to Turkey to meet with Yermak. But Yermak's situation is so precarious that the United States told him, no, not with Yermak, he's not welcome right now. So now Zelensky himself has had to go, or something like that, because they backed down. In other words, they said, no, given the situation with Yermak, absolutely not. So well, that's that. There's really not much more to it. He must be there doing who knows what nonsense. Ah, with Macron.
With Macron. Well, this is great, signing an agreement. Yes, this is great.
Sí, 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 esto es genial.
This is, there was or wasn't the following. I mean, this is,
While the situation in Ukraine is completely out of control, Zelensky began a tour of Europe, starting in France, where, together with President Macron, with a 13% approval rating, if I remember correctly, they signed an agreement to purchase 100 Rafale fighter jets, if I'm not mistaken. With whose money?
Con dinero de quién, bueno, en realidad nuestro, pero
No se sabe.
hasta entonces.
Well, actually, no one knows. Until then, hear the hug between friends. Yes, yes. What a character, Macron. He's wearing higher lifts than Zelensky. He's put on higher ones because they both wear lifts. And Macron must have seen that and said, well, I'll wear even bigger ones. This guy's not going to outdo me, not with how short he is. But anyway, here he is pointing. This is a Rafale we have here. This one doesn't really work, but it looks nice.
The time needed to produce 100 Rafales, probably about 10 years.
It's like if Macron came and signed an agreement with me saying that, I don't know, in 80 years he's going to give me billions. In 80 years I'll be more dead than anything else. So I can sign whatever I want. Well, this is similar. That is, he says, no, we're going to deliver the Rafales. But as you rightly point out, to deliver all 100, it would take at least 10 years. So they could start manufacturing them tomorrow, which won't be the case. Therefore, you really have to have a lot of faith in Ukraine to think that the current regime, that Ukraine as we know it, will hold out another 10 years against the Russians. You'd have to be very optimistic. Very optimistic. And then, of course, they still have to be built. They've already told him that, making an enormous effort. At best, maybe in a year, they'll deliver 10 or 20 at most, and we'll see in what condition. In a year at best, we already know they don't have the means to pay. So this is pure smoke, I mean. In other words, they're not going to deliver any Rafales to the Ukrainians in the end. This is all for Macron's greater glory, but just look at the spectacle. If I were French, I'd be burning the Bastille or storming the Élysée Palace right now. I mean, the country is in ruins, as you rightly pointed out, with 13%. The lowest popularity in the world. The whole country against him. Right, left, everyone.
The
country has become impoverished to levels not seen in France since World War II, with people in dire situations, with the economy on the verge of collapse. And this man, playing the great world leader, trying to keep Ukraine in the war and going around on tours and such, well, that presenting himself as the great Napoleon, I mean, the country is about to sink, and there he is acting like a fool. That is, with Macron, speaking of fools. Here we have Pedro Sanchez. And then, well, speaking of him, Alvarez the clown. This one really couldn't be any dumber. He just signed something that, yes, well, it must be $1 billion. I think we're going to give him. Just like that, no questions asked.
Since we have money to spare, a little gift.
Ursula, who called them and said, come on, son. Hey, Pedrito, do him a favor, give him something. Come on, fine, $1 billion. And I don't know what other nonsense they might have signed, but anyway. Oh, exchanges and things like that lead nowhere.
But I also want the citizens of Ukraine to know that the hearts of Spanish men and women are with you. Well, it speaks for itself, Garcia. That is to say, a just and lasting peace, and of course also Ukraine's European horizon, its membership in the European Union, the family it wishes to belong to.
A la familia a la que quieren pertenecer. Nos han informado de la situación sobre el terreno, nos han solicitado también.
We have been informed about the situation on the ground. We have also been asked, as could not be otherwise, for urgent solidarity to face this winter and protect their population from the cold supply cuts and Russian bombs. And I have assured the government of Ukraine, President Zelensky, that Spain will respond to that call, as we have been doing since the beginning of this invasion. I have conveyed two important announcements that I would now also like to share with the media and Spanish public opinion, and of course with the Ukrainian public as well. First, I have shared with President Zelensky that over the next month, Spain will mobilize a new military support package for Ukraine worth 615 million euros. This package will include, first,
Ya, a ver, esto me es que es de coña. Es decir, está diciendo nuestro estimado...
Our esteemed Prime Minister is saying that he stands in solidarity with the Ukrainians, that they're going to have a very hard winter, and that they shouldn't worry, because we're going to help make sure they don't freeze to death. This is coming from the man of the blackout guy, the one who couldn't even keep Spain supplied with electricity. He's the one who's going to come to their rescue so they don't freeze. If he can't manage it for Spaniards, how's he going to do it for Ukrainians? It's laughable. They come out and say, no, we're going to prevent this and that. But you went to Valencia with the king and had to run away under a hail of stones because of your management. So this is the guy who's going to fix Zelensky's problem this winter. Unbelievable. It's spectacular. Well, this is the nonsense. The European circus. Everyone just says whatever they want. It doesn't matter.
On Zelensky's schedule, he's still there. And tomorrow there's the meeting with Vitkov. There, this one with the Sultan.
The Sultan, he sure knows.
Kind of sketchy, huh?
No?
Yeah, he's getting old. You know how they are, he's getting old.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president. By the way, Fernando, isn't Pedro Sanchez really thin? He's always been slim, but more than before, right?
Yes, I think he's consumed by family problems. I mean, come on. Can you imagine in a serious country someone asking Putin or Xi Jinping, "How are you doing?" And them answering, "Well, I'm fine, but my wife is facing charges for a bunch of shady dealings and stuff." And, well, as you know, my father-in-law, who used to run saunas, quote-unquote brothels, and didn't really discriminate much between men and women, right? And he used that to blackmail politicians and all that, which actually helped me a lot. That's why I married my wife. But of course, she's depressed now, and it affects me because my brother, who's also involved, I got him a job there, and now he's living in the Moncloa. But yeah, just like that, with all the nerve, the brother. And having a car he bought, a camper van. He said, "I don't have anywhere to park it." And they tell him, "Well, then just park it at Moncloa." How mean. I mean, it's so old-fashionedly Spanish. A man who asks the judge and says, "But you, who were the director of something or other, of performing arts and so on, what did you do?" And he answers, "Well, if it's performing arts, then performing arts." But can't you be more specific? Well, the name says it all. Performing arts, the arts that take place on stage and so on, right? And then he says, "Well, and where were you going to work?" "Oh, I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know where your office is?" "No, it's just that I worked online." Can you believe this? This is recorded, you know? And on top of that, he's got his secretary. Wait a second.
I had listened to that talk you recommended, Fernando, the one with Pedro Baños and that journalist Bleda, about the stories behind the Spanish royalty. But what a mess, Fernando.
Tremendous. Well, a bit of everything, really.
From brothel to brothel, with prostitutes, murders. Well, the king. I mean, Fernando, this can't be. The king is homosexual. The queen has lovers. Everything, everything, everything and more. And the previous king, uff.
Well, the previous one. From CIA agents to many other things. But really, it's unbelievable. What's happening in Spain is straight out of Mortadelo and Filemon. I mean, it's something, well, just imagine. And then little Pedro Sanchez goes on saying, but well, I've got my party's secretary of organization, he's in jail and all that because he was corrupt. And one of my ministers, who was my right-hand man, Abalos, who also had, in the famous Coldo case, a deputy secretary or advisor, I think he was an advisor, a guy who used to be a, what do you call it? Also a bodyguard. No, not a bodyguard. One of those who work as bouncers in nightclubs and brothels. That kind of guy. I mean, of course, and that Minister Abalos had a bunch of lovers and all that. And then, well, I also have the Attorney General, whom I appoint, accused of all sorts of things. I mean, but can you imagine that?
It's just that, look, I don't know much about, well, actually about Spanish politics, but the more I learn, the more I'm reminded of our own scandals in Argentina and in the rest of Latin America. Birds of a feather, like father, like son.
But you also had, among several presidents and so on, skirt scandals and things like that.
Also, yes, why not? Yes, too. Not from royalty, because because there's no royalty, of course.
But what do I know? Menem or his crew or whatever had some kind of mess going on somewhere.
Menem. Right, Menem. Menem with Yuyito González, one of the showgirls. They call them femme fatales. They call them showgirls in Spain, too. From the revue, from the cabaret. Well, he had a love story, a romance at the time, with Yuyito González, the most important showgirl in Argentina. Menem, about 5 feet tall, and Yuyito González, about 6 feet, with curves absolutely stunning. And then on top of that, not only an affair, but Yuyito González got pregnant, and he abandoned her while she was pregnant, in a scene where she was thrown out of the Casa Rosada, the government house, at night, kicked out at dawn while pregnant. She later had to have an abortion. And back then, before the feminist revolution, the media presented it like, oh, what a rascal this Menem is, got Yuyito pregnant and kicked her out. That couldn't happen today. But no. And just like that. Right, man. Like father, like son, Fernando.
Yes.
Not only in bad things, but in good things too. We like you, not just Argentinians, the Latin American peoples as well. Warm, colorful, just like you. That's the good part. But when it comes to corruption and all that...
I mean, also, I think we have a special instinct, a special ability to pull off especially shabby, sloppy acts of corruption.
That is these soap opera-like ones, right?
Soap opera-like, I mean. Because the Germans do their shady dealings more in the mustache style. Like, we're going to become the most important military power in Europe again and things like that. And we're going to steal, well, they steal and all, but...
without charm. Yes. Here's the trickery. This one, I think. Well, anyway. So here we are. Let's begin. We're leaving geopolitics aside for a moment, but we're starting again now. Where do you want to start the tour?
Well, let's start from the north. We'll do a quick review from north to south, mainly focusing on the changes that have taken place. And what we have here is basically, well, in Sumy there's no movement. We can skip that. In Volchansk, what's left, if you look at the map, is this. The gray area is already under Russian control. So what you see there are 4 streets and not much more. And in fact, they keep advancing. The second to last thing was the capture of this part here in red, this sort of red triangle we see beyond. That was the second to last one. I don't remember its name because it's a village. But Volchansk is already so much under control. There was so little left that they're now focusing on advancing beyond that city. So, well, any day now they're going to say, well, those 4 houses that were left, we've taken them. And they'll talk. Let's say that taking one more city is very important because it's been the site of tremendous battles. That is, the battle for Volchansk has been extremely tough. So this, before November is over, they'll probably add it to the list of cities completely taken by the Russians and hand it over to the Ministry of Defense saying, we've already conquered this, the Russian Ministry of Defense. And then they'll keep going, as we were saying, even if we repeat ourselves. But that's how it is. In the Kharkiv area, all those in Kharkiv. In the Kharkiv area is where this first bridgehead that was made here joined with the area of, what's it called? Wait, because otherwise I'll lose track. Here, in Kamyanka, well, there's a village, a small settlement called Kamyanske or something like that. That is to say, they've taken it, they keep advancing little by little. They're not doing anything major here, but a small village around here, with just a handful of people, they've taken it. Or one of those Dovhanchanske or something, it was Dovhanchanske. Dovhanchanske, well, they've taken it.
That is to say, the union of these is confirmed, Fernando.
Yes, this is totally confirmed. Totally confirmed.
Yes, this conservative mapping didn't show it. It's already confirmed.
No. But now everyone is presenting this, conservatives and non-conservatives alike. So this is already a united front, and little by little it's aligning, as I said, with small advances every week. But at any moment it could take a leap, and the Russians could say, well, now that we've crushed the Ukrainians in such and such a place, boom, we're launching an offensive in Kharkiv because they won't have any troops left there. This is the big problem we've been pointing out for a long time, for a year and a half now, and it's getting worse and worse. They don't have troops, and if you don't have troops, they can give you all the weapons they want. You can build fortifications and trenches all you want to the max. If you don't have anyone to protect or defend them, it makes absolutely no difference. Well, this is what we're seeing, fewer and fewer troops. And then about Syrskyi, I read something somewhere that was quite funny. They said, I don't remember which telegram channel, that Syrskyi, who is the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainians, said, well, actually it was Zelensky who said it, Syrskyi, give me back my legions, paraphrasing Augustus in the Roman Empire when he lost 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. It's said, though it's largely a myth, that Augustus would wake up from nightmares shouting, Varus, Varus, because he was the general. Varus, Varus, give me back my legions. So well, here we were joking, saying, Syrskyi, give me back my legions, give me back my armies. That's because they no longer have enough troops. And it's becoming very clear how the attempt to prevent the fall of Pokrovsk is taking a huge toll on the Ukrainian army. Now let's see, well, Kupiansk, there's not much left to say. I mean, Kupiansk is practically taken, and the Ukrainians' counterattack attempts usually fail because they don't have enough capability. Let's not forget that the Russians already have drone superiority all along the front line. So not even the former drone advantage the Ukrainians had, they don't even have that anymore. And well, this is now just about how long they can hold out in this pocket. It might last a bit longer, it might last a bit less, but this isn't going anywhere anymore. I mean, it's like what's happening in Pokrovsk. They're going to lose it no matter what. It depends, because Zelensky gave orders before that European tour that they must hold every position to the end, to the last man. Boris Johnson must be thrilled with that kind of decision. Anyway, they're doing what they can, but really they no longer have any alternative or capacity to break this deadlock in the Ukrainian army. Which means, once again, loss of men in counterattacks that lead nowhere. Well, I mean, you counterattack, at best you take a small portion of what the Russians hold. Later, the Russians counterattack again. In this case, the Russians counterattack and retake what the Ukrainians had gained. So you've achieved nothing, not even a significant attrition of the Russian army. So here, as I said, with Kupiansk practically taken almost entirely, and with the Russians advancing further and further south, slowly closing this pocket, which is already quite sealed off because there's a river in the middle. But anyway, then the big news comes. Well, in Lyman, they're still tightening the encirclement, right? Fighting is already taking place in part of the south of Lyman. Lyman should be around here. Let's see. There. Exactly. And everything we see in gray, that's already Russian. All that gray area there is also Russian. So, well, they're slowly getting closer. This will take more effort because it's an important, very strategic city, and well, it's going to be tough, but it will fall. I mean, it might not fall in November, maybe not even in December, but definitely by January or February it will. That is, unless they collapse earlier. Because what we're seeing more and more is how the collapse in the southern sector of the front, in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia area, is increasingly affecting the rest of the front. But anyway, Lyman is also doomed. I mean, it's going to fall no matter what. This isn't even questioned or doubted. What it depends on now is the defenders' ability to hold out more or less. But all that will determine is whether they last a little longer or a little less. But it's over. I mean, the Russians are going to take it no matter what. And in fact, these advances are happening faster and faster, something we're seeing week after week. All these processes are speeding up. The big news? Well, the big news is in Siversk, which, look, a bit further down. Look, Siversk, we were saying, I think it was last Sunday. Well, Siversk is also about to fall, because they're surrounding it. Look, they're surrounding it from the north, the east, and the south, so it's basically ripe to fall. It was so close to falling that they've already entered Siversk, and even the most conservative sources say that the Russians have already taken at least 25% of the city. In 2 days. In 2 days, right?
Here we see the image of soldiers walking through the city.
Yes, they've probably taken more. The fact that there are soldiers walking around so calmly even suggests that there's a certain level of security in that area where they're moving. And, well, Siversk, if it doesn't fall this week, it'll fall next week, just like that, because it's an indefensible city. What have the Russians done? Siversk is in a valley, and above all, surrounded by high ground, especially to the north. They've captured all the northern heights, and then moved on to take those coming from the east and the south. And right now, the defense of Siversk is almost impossible. In fact, the failure they had, because this isn't the first time the Russians have tried to take Siversk, was a long time ago, when they tried to take it and failed because they couldn't capture the entire northern area. Now they've taken it, which means that from the northern area, which is much higher up, there's no saving this. And the way things are going, well, look, you can see it clearly on the map they already have. Well, here, more or less, Juan Cubero. Look, this could be about 40%. Almost 30-something percent, 40%. And at the speed they're moving, I'm telling you, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, being Wednesday, by next Sunday, we're here talking about the conquest of Siversk, which has already fallen. Well, just like that, right? I mean, this is moving very fast. And this city, as I said, has no defense. Once the outer ring in the elevated and fortified areas has been taken, and they've already taken it, the city itself is at their mercy. In fact, they're being bombarded from above, so there's nothing they can do. This one's lost. But Perdido, as I said, is moving at such a speed that by next Sunday we'll probably be talking about the capture of Siversk. And this is crucial to align the front, to make it a straighter line as much as possible, and then to keep advancing towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, which are becoming increasingly worried. We'll see what happens. It's not yet time to talk about Sloviansk or Kramatorsk, but it might turn out to be easier than one would expect to attack two already large cities, because they're going to face extremely serious problems once the Russians launch their offensive. Serious problems defending them due to a lack of manpower, ammunition, drones, everything. So perhaps the Ukrainians will surrender quite easily. We'll see. This is just my speculation. After Siversk, we move further south, and in the south, what we basically have is Konstantinivka. They're advancing at a slower pace, but they keep going. They've already taken almost all of the Ivanopilia area and are gradually pushing into the city. It's a large city in terms of the current fighting. So, well, it's also a large city with defensive difficulties, because especially from the ridge, though not only from the ridge, you can clearly see how it's being encircled. It's also in a valley area, meaning a low-lying zone, and the Russians are coming from higher ground. Which means this favors the advance of the Russians. And well, this is going to take more time, but it's also a city that in 2 or 3 months at most will have been completely taken. Another disaster for Zelensky, who will keep losing cities one after another. It's already happening, you know. And we're already talking about places of some importance. We're not talking about towns and villages. Several of those are falling every day, at least a dozen. And this, well, the same thing. Another disaster the Ukrainians will have to swallow. Then we'll move on to the well-known Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Well, Pokrovsk is completely taken, I mean. But come on, the Russians are already there calmly having drinks in Pokrovsk. Because really, this is important. This massive explosion. Look at that explosion and the shockwave. And now we'll explain why, because they're dropping FABs, that is, glide bombs, and not just the small ones, but the 3,000 kilo ones. Look there, like this one, and boom. I mean, this, of course, this blows up a building, but obviously the shockwave wipes out the building and everything within 500 meters around it. Well, if they're dropping a few of those on you every day, yeah, several.
Sometimes more than one.
Sometimes more than one. So what do we have here on this map? Well, the southern part has been lost. That is, if you look closely, Minevka has a somewhat odd shape. It's like the classic cartoon dog bone, with a section here. Right there, exactly. Well, the southern part of the bone is now practically in Russian hands. What remains is the northern part, where they're holding out under the heaviest FAB bombardments. But, well, that's just it. They're holding on in dramatic conditions. The Ukrainians themselves are saying that either you surrender or they blow you up. Since they don't even have the capacity to provide minimal medical aid, it's enough to get wounded for you to bleed to death. Maybe from a really minor injury, but there's nothing else they can do. A disaster. In Pokrovsk, which is already taken, the next to last thing is that they're starting to move toward Hryzny, which is this town right next to Pokrovsk. Smaller, it's more of a village. Well, that's the next step. So the Russians are already on to the next step. Minivka is already written off. They know it's going to fall quickly. And now they're focused on this. Look here. The gray zone. How they've been advancing. Boom, 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 boom. And they're practically at the gates of Hryzny. And on the other side, too, in this red zone, they're already on the outskirts of the area closer to Pokrovsk. In other words, they're going for it, and everything suggests that once they launch, they'll take it very quickly. This is much smaller, it's a village, and from there, the situation changes completely. Well, it's over. The Numantine resistance the Ukrainians have been putting up here is over because they no longer have any strongholds. They have nothing left. Syrskyi went all in on dismantling this area, on trying to rescue first holding Pokrovsk and Manivka to the last man, and then trying to liberate it when it was already impossible. While they're losing men and piling up, there are no units left for anything. This buildup of units is what's allowing many sectors of the front to advance with extraordinary speed, especially in the south. Same here, see? If we keep going down, what we have further south is already the absolute disaster of the Zaporizhia area. These two have surrendered, that is, two Ukrainians who dressed as civilians.
No, we're civilians. We're civilians.
No, of course. But well, these guys have been taken prisoner, which all things considered, hey, it's the best thing that could happen to you. Another disaster. Well, let's not forget that in Pokrovsk are the elite units the Ukrainians still have, and they're losing them for nothing. Well, here indeed. This is very important because this Novopavlivka, which we were talking about last Sunday, they haven't entered yet, and they already have about half, no, not half anymore, almost all of it. That is, as you can see, this whole area, kind of rectangular, that's on one side of the river. They've taken it, they've crossed to the other side of the river, and they still have these 4 streets left to take that you can see here. This was done in a very skillful operation, taking advantage of the terrible weather and the spectacular fog. When there's fog, drones can't fly, it's very difficult for them, and they infiltrated. By the time the Ukrainians realized it, half the city was already taken. Well, that's it. All of that is now in Russian hands, and what's left, the few remaining streets, they're going to take as well. This is also a hard blow. Why? Because once Novopavlivka is taken, the field is open, since this was the major fortification or fortified city that was holding back the Russian advance in this sector. Well, that's over. As I said, another disaster to add for the Ukrainians. As I said, we'll be able to announce the complete capture of Novopavlivka without any problem next Sunday. Which means another stronghold, another city, let's say, added to the list of cities taken by the Russians this month. Ivanivske was already taken. Well, they keep advancing around here, and now we move south. That is to say, well, look. Ah, right, from here you can see it clearly. Novopavlivka was the containment point, the dam that held back, so to speak, militarily, an advance from here toward Meshova or Mezova, depending on how you want to pronounce it, just up north, which is the major logistical hub of the area. There we see it, Meshova, right there, just above the little soldier with the Ukrainian flag and the unit, there, Meshova.
I don't know if you see her. Yes, up here, Fernando.
Well, that was the big containment. Once that containment ended, the advance toward Meshova is going to be quick, and it's another place that will fall before too long. Because, as I said, these mini platoons, besides, in this whole area, there's no longer a Ukrainian army as such. What there is are scattered, isolated units, but there's no longer a functioning, coordinated joint command. There's no front line anymore, no resources, that is, not enough drones to sustain or slow down the Russian advance. It's a disaster. So this is getting worse. It's only going to get worse. And there's no solution here anymore. It's over. Let's see whether this disaster or how this disaster already affects the rest of the front. If, let's say, there's a contagion effect and even greater desertions begin to happen, if that's possible, and the chaos we're already seeing in this area starts spreading, well then if we move down south, here's something interesting. In Orikhiv, here it is. These two Dnipropetrovsk, well, this is already in this activity. Orikhiv has already been taken, and they're going to move on to this one, Velika Novosilka, or something like that it's called. What names, really? It's quite something. They're going to assault this one too, any moment now. In fact, the city of Orestopol itself is an administrative division. That is, what separates it is a river. Well, this place here, Tike, mispronounced, is already in Russian hands. But there's more. Even a city called Gay, where the little red flag is, also next to Sandrivka, they've taken that too. But look, this Russian advance. Where is Prokrovsk? Ending in E, not Prokrovsk. This is another one, it's next to it. How far could it be? You, with that amazing skill for measuring from this position, how far could it be to Prokrovsk?
From here to here.
4 kilometers.
5 kilometers from here, more or less. Right now, about 5 kilometers, and another 6 from here, more or less.
5 or 6 kilometers is nothing in this part of the front.
With nothing in between.
Nothing. Of course, with nothing in between. Indeed, this village of Gay, or Hay, or however it's pronounced, well, from here there's really nothing. I mean, in fact, people have been talking about this place they've taken. I mean, as you can see, it's just a street. I mean, there's nothing here. Well, just fields, and from there they'll move on to Prokrovsk, a key logistical hub, in no time. And when I say no time, I mean really fast. But notice that the further south you go, the worse it gets. In other words, the disaster keeps growing. Here already, look, here we see Danilivka. Do you remember we talked about Danilivka?
Danilivka. ¿Os acordáis que hablábamos de Danilivka? Que por fin, después de una lucha intensa...
That finally, after an intense struggle, the Russians had taken Danilivka, and that this meant cutting off the road that supplies Dilapola and so on. It's not that they took it in Danilivka, it's that they crossed the road, and this place mentioned here, Nekavivka or so, means they're already advancing beyond that. All of this because what they're doing is a large encircling maneuver around Irapol from the north. Well, from the north and from all sides, north, south, east. But notice that now, I mean, we're talking about what they've crossed. There's a river there, I can't remember its name. You lose track. Anyway, they've already crossed it. Crossing rivers is always complicated, and they're already moving in that direction. Which one is it? Haichul? Haichul? Well, they've already crossed that Haichul, and that's what we're seeing right now. Look, you can clearly see the road there and how they're already crossing, but at an incredible speed. They keep advancing, and at this point it's hard to keep things updated because you have to do it almost every half hour. There's always something new. Well, Veselis has already been taken, this place here has been taken, this one with the unpronounceable name, well, it's unpronounceable, Taz something or other. So, well, be careful with this scene.
Oh, why?
Because they're going to end up dead. Who are we kidding?
With a blast, that's why I say it.
Sorry. No, I love it, always have. I think war has to be seen for what it really is, but well, the problem is that they censor us.
The Ukrainian infantry escaping. Ukrainian?
In
this unpronounceable place, how do you pronounce this?
That is to say, well, this has already fallen. And what we're seeing in that image were soldiers retreating toward Vilniupol. In other words, right now, the Russians are already on the outskirts of Ulapol, meaning the outskirts as in entering the first dakas, the first country houses around the area. So they're already there, because this was the last part. And in fact, what we're seeing in this whole area, which is also falling, Zelensky, Haichul, and so on, is that they're not even fighting. They're retreating to Ulapol. So tomorrow or the day after, we'll see everything in red, and that the Russians are practically storming Ulapol already. Ulapol is going to last 2 newscasts too, because the Ukrainians no longer have any defensive capacity. And the fall of Ulapol is a disaster, a huge one, because from that point on, the advance toward the Dnipro will move at tremendous speed. Each time, as you can see, with less and less. Yes, you see, around Ulapol there are still some defensive lines, what we see here in darker yellow and so on, but they're increasingly just isolated structures. A fortress here, another one there, lost strength, indefensible. That is the famous lines of fortifications we saw in Donetsk, one after another, connected to each other. This now, we're seeing the ones in the south. These are the southern ones. But since the Russians are coming in from the east and the north, they'll be hitting them from the rear. And notice that once they've passed Ulapol and Origid, which is down here, after those, what's there? Nothing. Open ground, not a single fortification, nothing. We can clearly see, as Ezekiel points out perfectly, that it's over. And from that point on, well, what they're doing now, they've basically written off Ulapol as half lost, is desperately trying to send whatever units they can to Arajab or Arajit, however you want to call it, to hold it as long as possible. But it's a desperate move, and there's little sign it will last long. The moment Ulapol falls, Arajit will fall right after, basically as soon as it takes the Russians to get there. And that will practically mean the complete conquest of what's left of Zaporilla and the beginning of the siege of the city of Zaporilla. All this comes with an advance, as we're seeing already deep into Dnipropetrovsk, which means that when this happens, when the umpteenth negotiation comes around, those fake ones they stage just for show, then they'll say, no, come on, Wyckoff again, let's negotiate, let's talk with Zelensky's successor and so on. And then they'll tell the Russians, look, President Putin said, among other things, that territory conquered by the Russians is territory that won't be given back. And since a good part of Dnipropetrovsk has been taken, well, that's that. And while they're at it, they'll keep all of Dnipropetrovsk, just as they'll keep Kharkiv, just as they'll keep Odessa, for other reasons. That is, Odessa keeps getting pounded. There isn't a day without bombings, let's not forget that. But well, Odessa and the area around Odessa, because there's a port, I never remember the name, Izmail or something like that, that's near Odessa at the mouth of the Danube. So it's a port, actually a double port. On one side are the Romanians and on the other the Ukrainians, which means that from Romania they carry out explosions in this port. And 2 or 3 days ago it was hit very hard. Well, this is also going to fall into Russian hands, but it's already further along, and as a result of this snowball effect, the disaster they already have in the south is going to keep growing and will eventually destroy the Ukrainian army. That's perfectly clear. Besides, as we were saying, the Europeans are going crazy because they no longer have money to send them.
There really isn't. Fernando, there are many more pending issues. Among others, the incident in Poland with a railway attack, an attack on railway infrastructure. Well, regarding Venezuela, we could also present quite a few things. The law on the Epstein files finally approved, and Trump furious. Well, several things. Before that, I wanted to make 2 or 3 announcements. First, the talk with Juan Antonio on Fridays. This week, instead of Friday, it will be tomorrow. Tomorrow, Juan Antonio will be live right here, so don't miss it. Second, next December 15th, in a week, Eduardo Villor is going to hold a meeting with his followers, and with the followers of our channel as well, Demolidores and Meperos, right? All of them can take part next December 15th at 6 p.m. at El Pulqui Bar, the same place as our last meeting. Monday, December 15th, a talk on geopolitics. Everyone's invited. We'll announce it here several times so you remember. And third, we're reactivating TikTok, Fernando, with clips, with shorts. Not only shorts here on YouTube, but also on TikTok. Lots of shorts on TikTok.
I promise not to dance or sing so it doesn't rain. The weather thing, no, because that would be, let's see, torture for the wreckers. It can't be. And for the female wreckers too, of course, I'm against torture. I can't do that. But anyway, I'm capable of doing any silly thing because I love doing these kinds of things. But that said, indeed, Now let's move on to Poland. It's laughable. I mean, the Europeans, honestly, it's a circus. The Poles go and say, it really sounds like a joke.
Here are the images, Fernando. By the way, one more announcement, Fernando. Join us on our English channel with the marvels of technology. Fernando speaking perfect English with a BBC-style British accent. Absolutely incredible.
Which, as everyone knows, the BBC stands for. This joke is bad, but I have to make it. Weddings, baptisms, and communions. But anyway, I mean, that Moragón humor, right? That awful humor. Sorry, but...
Who is this man here, over there on the side?
This good man. Who is this good man? Well, the Prime Minister, who dressed casually. He said, well, I'm going to the countryside to fool around a bit. That is to say, and what he's saying in Polish, of course, naturally, he's Polish, so he says it in Polish, is, no, I'm going to talk about this terrible attack. Some tracks were blown up here and so on. I don't know. Then comes the good part. He says, no, this was the Russians. But then he says, no, we looked into it, and no, it wasn't the Russians. Well, it was Ukrainians who blew up the train tracks. But the blame is on the Russians. Let's see, if it was the Ukrainians, how come the Russians are to blame? They say no, because they're Ukrainians, but Russian ones. That's really stretching it. I mean, that's where we are. So no, it was Ukrainians, but the Russians are to blame. Because, you see, the Russians are always at fault for everything. It doesn't matter if they're Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Mongolians, or Congolese. Behind it all, it's always the Russians. That's already well known, so yeah.
Well, yes, train traffic was interrupted. That was the first piece of information. A while later, an attack. No longer an explosion, maybe the result of an accident or a mishap. No, an attack. A while later, a Russian attack. And then yes, we captured 2 people. And a while later, those 2 people were Ukrainian. Oh no, Ukrainian, but Russian. They kept rearranging the information so that the outcome was always the same. But well, we've seen this so many times before.
No, this is being done in a very sloppy way, what we're seeing every day. Trying to instill in the local population, in this case the Polish people and so on, the idea that the Russians are coming and that anything that happens is the Russians' fault. And look how bad they are. They've blown up the train tracks, and next it'll be the tracks next to your house, and they'll end up bombing, and so on. This narrative has to be created increasingly unbelievable. But anyway, every day we get several of these. Let's see who says the biggest nonsense.
Task video, by the way, courtesy of our Telegram channel, Friend and Brother, Wars and Geopolitics. Don't miss it. Everyone's invited to subscribe. One of the best, if not the best, channels about geopolitics in Spain, on Telegram. And speaking of European inconsistencies, I should have introduced this earlier, but well, I just remembered now. Pay attention to Macron in his meeting with Zelensky yesterday about Ukraine's European future.
I want to conclude, once again, that Ukraine belongs to the European family, not only because of its geography, but also because of its values, its history, and its courage. The path toward the European Union will be demanding. It will require effort and deep reforms, particularly in the areas of the rule of law, transparency, governance, and the fight against corruption.
Fernando, I want your explanation.
One or the other, my dear friend.
Let's see, to put it this way, relatively concisely. Macron comes along and says, because the Ukrainians share our values, history and all that, well fine. I mean, but our values. And then he says, they're corrupt and they need to stop being corrupt. So if they share our values, that means European values are corruption. They don't even know what they're saying. I mean, not even the script writers anymore. The ones who write their speeches know what they're putting in them. So, well, they make fools of themselves and all that, and they say, no, they share our values, our common history and all that. But, well, they have to make reforms if they want to join, because since they're corrupt, not these ones, not here, right? Well, this is just the daily life of Europeans now. This circus our leaders have set up for us. This is, well, fine.
On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, this very bad news finally arrives.
On this vote, the yeas are 400.
The voting. Well, basically the counting of, sorry, without a translation here, I don't remember.
Hay básicamente el conteo de, perdón, yo sin traducción acá no recuerdo a veces. Debo realizar las traducciones. Bueno,
sometimes I have to do the translations. Well, the yeas, as they're called in Old English, obviously refer to the affirmative votes. The yeas, they call them yeas, 427. The affirmative votes. The nays, the no votes, the negative votes are 1. All objections to this law are immediately suspended by the supermajority of more than 2/3, and the bill is passed without objections. In this way, the approval is almost unanimous. Almost unanimous. Here's the official name count. Well, the law on the Epstein Files Act, something like that. So feared by Trump, because the Republicans were going to support it.
Los republicanos iban a acompañarla. Esta ley determina la publicación de todos los archivos.
This law mandates the publication of all files related to the Epstein case. In the end, it was supported not only by the MAGA Republicans from the Make America Great Again movement, for whom the Epstein issue is at the center of political concerns, but by all Republicans except one, 427 to 1. And that one, supposedly, because he wanted greater transparency in the judicial process. Transparency, but at the same time he wanted the concealment of the files a bit longer. A bit contradictory.
El ocultamiento de los archivos, un poco contradictorio, pero bueno, todas las manos arriba para la...
Anyway, all right, everyone, hands up for the approval of this. Trump is very angry. And according to Epstein's brother, in statements made today in Quantico, they're at FBI headquarters. For the past few days, practically all the staff have been in a race against time. Erasing with correction fluid. In my day we called it liquid paper, the brand. With erasers, digitally, however they can, all mentions in the Epstein files of Trump and the Republicans. This is the situation in the United States, and Trump is furious about it.
It's already happened. Not only has it been approved in the House of Representatives, but it's also been passed in the Senate. And on top of that, Trump has committed himself. Though whether he'll actually do it is another matter, since we know Trump changes his mind every 3 seconds. He said earlier that if it was approved by both chambers, he would commit to signing the bill.
Which means that in theory, in the event of a presidential veto, with a reinforced majority, as in this case, the veto expires.
Yes, yes. But also he would sign without any problem and all that. Well, I mean, what we're going to see... Look, the most interesting thing about this might be that in this attempt at mutual destruction, Democrats against Republicans, Trumpist Republicans against non-Trumpists, and all this mess, something more might come out than what would in a normal situation. That is, in that attempt to attack the other side, you go too far, you let something slip, and then in the end, you start pulling the thread, and it has huge implications. That's the best we can hope for. Obviously, everything possible will be done to keep the big stuff from coming out. I mean, but as I said, I think it was either Brother Dave or one of those guys who said they have everything, that everything's recorded, that no one there is safe. Well, we'll see how they handle it. Because this is the problem. Everyone has gone crazy throwing the Epstein case at each other, starting with Trump, who was the one who said, no, I'm going to expose this. And now, let's see how far they can go to stop it. And well, let's hope the victims, the political victims of this, are just a few. Because if not, the collapse could be spectacular. I'm telling you, no one's getting out of this. No one, you hear?
About the Epstein case. Well, right after that, here's what happened. Trump on Air Force One, and not very happy about it. And here, a reporter's question. This guy Trump sometimes has no filter. He's about to say something outrageous to a reporter just because of the question about Epstein. Watch out, huh?
Por la pregunta sobre Epstein. Atención, ¿eh?
Mr. President, what did Jeffrey Epstein mean in his emails when he said you knew about the girl?
I don't know anything about that. They would have announced it a long time ago. It's really, what did it mean when he spent all that time in Brooklyn with the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, and all the other people he used to hang out with? Quiet piggy, quiet piggy.
What an animal. How he rejected everything. And then the journalist's logical follow-up question. If you really didn't take part in anything, why have you refused to this day to release the files? And Trump answers, angry, no, silence, little sardine. Quiet, quiet piggy. Silence, little sardine. The reporter was probably a bit chubby. What an animal. What a brute.
Qué bestia.
Bueno, a ver, ya conocemos que Trump lo que
Well, let's see. We already know that Trump, when it comes to principles, manners, and all that, has very few, putting it mildly, none at all. So, well, now that he's president and feels powerful, he just does whatever he wants. And well, the poor journalist, should probably be glad he only called her little pig and not something worse, because he has no problem saying something outrageous. So well, instead of little pig, which is almost affectionate, he could have called her disgusting pig, for example. I mean, really, that's the level of Western politics on both sides of the Atlantic. And that is the symptom, one of the symptoms of the absolute decline of the North American empire and its European counterparts. They're heading straight into the sewer of history and at a dizzying speed. And well, this is what we've got. That is to say, I'll take this opportunity to give a world exclusive. Yes, a world exclusive, really. This hasn't been said yet, a world exclusive. Pay attention, everyone. Really pay attention. I'm being very serious here, okay? Everyone, pay attention. When I tell this, all the demolishers, men and women alike, will immediately start talking to their relatives, their friends, their enemies. I heard this, you've got to see it, you've got to like it, you've got to share it. That's how it is, because this only happens once in a lifetime. And here's the thing, my Chinese sources, today I had an interesting contact with my high-level Chinese sources, tell me two things, basically. They tell me that within the Chinese Communist Party, which obviously runs China, there's an increasing debate, and more high-ranking members are questioning China's foreign policy. And what are they questioning? That even though this can be maintained at a political or rhetorical level, in practice, the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, they say, has to end. That this policy, which was fine back in Deng Xiaoping's time, can't continue now that China is a global power without interfering in the internal affairs of other states. And they give examples. We can't keep leaving our allies on their own. In other words, political interference must be carried out in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and many other places, because otherwise we're going to have problems. That is to say, in practice, we're already seeing a shift from what Chinese policy has been since Deng Xiaoping until now, a much tougher stance, where the Chinese are going to intervene, not in the American way, meaning not by bombing or doing those kinds of things, but by getting involved in the internal affairs of other states, in the sense that if they have to support something, they're going to support it with all the consequences, and not with that sort of inhibition they've had until now of, well, let's leave it as it is, or let's do diplomacy. no, look, diplomacy is all well and good, but there are times when diplomacy no longer works. So that's one of the big pieces of news. The second major piece of news on this matter, the Chinese are also rethinking something.
Se están también replanteando una cosa, y es que dicen, bueno, y esto.
And they say, well, the North Americans had already said this, but the Chinese claim the opposite. Globalization, there are basically two models of globalization, to put it bluntly. The one the North Americans proposed, this financialized, absolutely woke globalization of relativistic neoliberalism, and so on, non-productive. Well, that one, as Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, said in 2022, is over. And therefore, from now on, the global economic fracture is inevitable. And in fact, we're already seeing it. And here, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, Latin America is in for a very tough time, because Trump is already in Monroe Doctrine 2.0 mode, meaning America for Americans. And they're going to have a hard time with that, because we're already seeing how things are going not only in Venezuela, but how they're intervening everywhere. Anyway, this is only just beginning. Second point, there was the globalization of the Chinese, that of the global South, which was a different model, the famous win-win, etc., etc. Well, that's over too. The Chinese are rethinking things and realizing that from now on they need to be as self-sufficient as possible, of course. Obviously, even though they produce a lot, they still need to acquire oil and gas, and they're buying it, for example, from the Russians or the Saudis and so on. But they're now going to try to depend as little as possible on the outside world. So this will be, though they won't put it that way, the end of the globalization proposed by the Chinese.
El final de la globalización propuesta por los chinos. Y esto es lo que me estaban contando.
And this is what they were telling me, besides the fact that they're absolutely furious about the whole issue with the Japanese. They're going to hit the Japanese hard. So what the Prime Minister, this crazy woman, basically said is that if the Chinese decide to invade Taiwan, that would affect Japan's security interests, and therefore they would intervene militarily in favor of Taiwan. Put that way bluntly, of course the Chinese are furious. No, beyond furious. Absolutely livid. And they're already starting to take some pretty serious measures, like telling students who were in Japan to come back right now, that they have no business being there. And they're going to take even more measures, you know?
In fact, Fernando, in the latest report, read, at the government's initiative, Chinese airlines offered the option to refund tickets to Japan, trips to Japan, free of charge. And that has already led to the cancellation of around 500,000 flights from now until the end of the year. Flights that had already been booked and paid for, now refunded. And the consequent cancellation of hotel reservations as well.
And it will be worth more. Because let's not forget, and this was many years ago, now they have more power. But there was already a serious clash with Japan when the Japanese detained a Chinese fishing boat, took it to Japan, and so on. The Chinese got fed up and said, oh, you're not giving us back the fishing boat? Well, then you're out of rare earths, the famous rare earths. And the Japanese were left without rare earths and quickly had to back down, because otherwise they'd be back in the Neolithic. Careful, because this lady didn't just say that. To top it off, she said, no, and besides, we're going to allow the Americans to bring nuclear weapons into Japan. I mean, the Chinese right now must be itching to strangle the Japanese. Careful, because this is going to have serious repercussions. And it's clear, look, this lady wouldn't say these things without the approval of the United States. In other words, the United States is pushing Japan against the Chinese with the extremely serious consequences that could have. Because the idea that the Americans could place nuclear weapons in Japan, that's a big deal. Careful.
Recordemos, porque alguien podría, sin conocimiento...
Let's remember, because someone without knowledge of history might describe China's response as exaggerated. Let's remember the history between Japan and China, with Japan's invasion of China, the 20 million Chinese who were killed. More, even more. I don't remember exactly.
Más todavía, no recuerdo exactamente.
Sí, mira, si coges, depende cómo lo cojas, pero si coges...
Yes, look, it depends on how you look at it, but you can take two dates. One, 1931, when the Japanese invaded Manchuria and created a puppet state, Manchukuo, and another 1937, when the Japanese, from Manchukuo, invaded the rest of China. Well, in all of this, it's estimated, obviously including famines caused by the Japanese and so on, that around 35 million Chinese died. Not a small number.
De punta a punta. De punta a punta.
From end to end. From end to end, exactly. I mean, that's where it becomes clear. I have the figure right here. Starting from 30, that's why the mistake. From 37 until the end of World War II, the portion of those deaths counted as part of the World War II conflict is 20 million, but including all the earlier ones, indeed many more.
Sorry for... No, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're already at numbers where you say, well, that's it. You can understand the hatred the Chinese have toward the Japanese. That's just how it is. And when, on top of that, the Japanese haven't acknowledged much of the atrocities they committed, have dragged their feet, and continue to defend that historical past, especially the current Prime Minister of Japan, who used to regularly visit the Yasukuni Shrine, where many Japanese soldiers who died during World War II are buried, but also war criminals who were executed in a trial parallel to Nuremberg in Tokyo. Of course, going there to lay flowers for those gentlemen, well, and this is one of the people who used to go there regularly to lay flowers. It's something like this. I'd put it this way. Imagine that in Germany there were a cemetery full of German soldiers, and on top of that, Goering, Himmler, Marshal Jodl, Marshal Keitel, Goebbels were buried there, and that from time to time a German minister would go there to lay some flowers. Well, that's what they're doing. So, the tension is going to keep rising, and the Chinese, from what I've been able to talk with them, I hadn't seen them this angry in a long time.
But absolutely furious.
With good reason. Their usual caution, well, let's hold back, but this time they've really blown up.
By the way, let's wrap up the broadcast with something. Speaking of the soap opera-like behavior of our governments, Spanish, Argentine, Mexican, Latin American. Well, now Mexico, right, with Claudia Sheinbaum. But we're often characterized by rather unfortunate leaders, both in Latin America and in Spanish-speaking Europe. You just mentioned the Germans as being a bit more serious, but less and less so. In that sense, the Germans lately seem to be going through a process of, how to put it, a turn toward the South, right, in connection with the global South. Well, I just saw this a little while ago, just saw it here. I'm surprised. What's this about? This was, plain and simple, a military exercise carried out today in Germany, in a subway station, or Subter, as it's called in some countries, not far from here. There, in plain sight on the right, the name of the station, Jungfernheide. A station not far from here, on the way to the airport. I must have passed through it 1,000 times. Well, within the context of the Russian threat, they conducted an urban warfare exercise. That's what they call it in English. Urban guerrilla training, something like that, called Volwerk Berlin 3. What's the translation of that? It's kind of hard to translate. Well, yes, something like Berlin Explosion 3, a play on words between Berlin and the German word for bear, too. But to top it all off, there was even an accident not long ago, last month, in a little town called Erding. They also carried out a military operation as part of the internal conflict, and the police were clearly unaware of it. Someone who witnessed the situation, probably a passerby with no bad intentions, called the police, and suddenly the police showed up, and shooting broke out between the police and the army. But of course, the army was using blanks, since obviously they don't use live ammunition for this. Well, in the end, one soldier was injured. So they wanted to be in Berlin as a sort of statement, and everyone was expecting some kind of spectacular operation. And pay attention to how it all started, right from the beginning. You'll see. The guy coming down, the soldier, a soldier going down the stairs into the train station, the subway, the metro, right?
At least they would have taken the people out, right? Or with the people still there.
No, apparently people at the other stations were swearing about the service outage in this area. But yes, this time people were aware. Good thing. There's a guy going down the stairs. Now, just a second. There, all quick. Like that. Yeah, of course, he twists his ankle.
But what are they all doing like that, with their hands, as if they were in school?
Well, Fernando, but what is this? This is ridiculous. Yes, wait. Those are the carts, the ones we've seen 1,000 times. There's the cleaning crew's cart, with the trash bins, the plastic bags. Well, obviously the cleaning guy ran off, and that's what's happening here in this operation.
And besides, there's always someone who sits on the edge of the platform just to jump afterward. And he says, "Man, this is a military operation." And here, watching, the workers say, "What are these clowns doing?"
He's coming down carefully. Look, do you see?
Now there's one who sits down, you'll see. This one sits down, sits and says, "Man, let's not make a mess of things. Of course, these guys are going to defeat the Russians." My goodness.
I remember people going down the stairs here, rushing to catch the train, faster than that soldier, without any problem. This one went down a bit too fast, and twisted his ankle, obviously. And the next one is lowering himself down, resting his butt on the edge.
Of course, and here are the workers. They look like the ones from the subway there with their phones recording. But what is this? It's ridiculous. And over there, a subway, a train. It's not really clear what they're doing. I've stayed calm.
Bastard, but it's just that.
And everyone there, watching, with the journalists. What are they carrying? To unload the luggage or what? I mean, really.
What a ridiculous joke.
We trained, under the best possible conditions, for intra-urban operations in a highly complex situation. Well, now, on Netflix, it's just the second part of this reality show, Physical 100.
Yes, they even carry him calmly on the stretcher, as if in no war situation could this be done so peacefully. I mean, yeah, hold on, I'm coming with the cart. And those who insist on going like that, with their hands placed like that.
That is he pretending to be lame, or is he actually lame? Look, Fernando, this is all so bizarre, so delusional.
Honestly, if I were Putin and saw this happening, I'd say, look, we're not stopping in Kiev, we're going all the way to Berlin. Because there's nothing to be done with this. I mean, we'd defeat them with just a couple of shots.
Exactly. Sorry, with this we want to protect national infrastructure. To get on this one, who's supposed to be injured?
Madre mía, madre
Sacado con
mía.
un costo en la cabeza.
Well, well, well. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Well, in that case, the answer makes a lot of sense. For us as a battalion, and for me as the commander, it's simple.
Es más sencillo hacer estas operaciones en otro lugar.
It's easier to carry out these operations somewhere else. But our base of operations is Berlin. This is different in Germany than in Latin America. But in many countries, the interference of the armed forces in internal politics, or in situations that belong to the police, implies a violation of the Constitution and of the most basic principles of the rule of law, because this is the step before military interference in political matters, in democracy, right? What is the role of the armed forces? The protection of a state's borders outward, not inward. That's what the police are for. Well, these guys here in the Berlin subway, as if nothing were happening. I don't know what young Germans must think.
Pero vamos a ver, yo no sé lo que pensarán los jóvenes alemanes, pero yo veo esto y digo, vamos a ver.
But I see this and I say, let's see, if this is the army I have to serve in to face the Russians, I'd go into exile right now. The farther away, the better. I mean, I'd go to Latin America, Australia, South Africa, because these guys wouldn't last 2 minutes against the Russians. But seriously, this has as much resemblance to a real war situation as pure coincidence. I mean, it's like if I put on a costume and start fooling around there. Same thing.
There's a young man lying on the ground with a machine gun. Well, that's obviously a fake wound. When I first saw it, I said that's not a real wound, it's a prosthetic, a fake injury.
They got completely wrecked because they have a bunch of wounded and dead. What a shitty operation they planned.
What's the danger? The Russians attacking the subway. This Fernando here. There's no turning back, huh?
No, this really doesn't make any sense. No, Europe has no solution. I've been saying it for a long time. Europe is heading toward absolute misery. I mean, we're going into a second Middle Ages with these people. Come on, we'd lose a war. Not even to the Russians. We'd lose a war to anyone who isn't European. It's ridiculous. Besides, they don't realize that their attempts to militarize society and spread fear about the Russians coming, doing all this clownish stuff, have the opposite effect. Honestly, if I say this, I can't stop laughing. And I say, come on, would the Russians even consider coming here? What for? That is to say, in a situation where, well, with all this nonsense, they're trying to hide a devastating economic crisis that Germany is going through, which isn't a circumstantial crisis, it's a structural one. In other words, there's no way out of this. Well then, do something. If you want to put on a clown show, at least do it right. I mean, set up an operation that, let's see, you could hire any halfway decent film director and they'd put on a better show. I mean, why this? Do you really think you can just walk into a subway like that, where supposedly the enemy is? Or who knows, and you just stroll in and this guy trips, because he doesn't even know how to go down the stairs.
And he says, what an incredible ankle. There.
There, what pain. And this with the little hand like that, so they don't get lost. And with the calm way they go down. This is a war situation. You don't think that, hey, I'd go down there, do you?
Come on, you go down.
Oh, look, let me sit down or I'll hurt myself. And here, everyone, look how they go, with their little hand like this, in a line. In a line, you know. It's just that if they hit one guy, they kill them all right after.
Fernando, it's funny because it's pathetic, but it's also worrying because you, in Germany, with the armed forces stationed in the subway or metro, just 2 stops from here, from my house. This is a serious matter, Fernando. It's delaying a war with Russia. Pure madness. More and more. What this is about is, this is older. but no, I won't say
Iba
it.
a decir que era más viejo que el mear, pero no, no lo digo. Esto es más viejo que, vamos, que es de manual.
This is old news.
Tú
Come on.
creas un enemigo exterior.
It's straight out of the playbook. You create an external or fake enemy, the Russians, and from there you build this kind of thing and whatever else you can think of to generate fear among the population, so that in the end people accept the restriction of freedoms because national security comes first, because we're going to face a terrible situation, because the Russians are going to invade us. What they're really trying to do is finish off democracy in Europe, and in this case, democracy in Germany. That's it. And that way they can impose brutal measures on Europe's impoverished population by force. Because they'll be able to decree whatever they want. Like, no, since the Russians are coming, we're declaring a state of siege, a state of whatever. And from there, democratic laws are suspended, effectively a dictatorship. And that's that. This is what's happening. This is where we're headed. They're doing it terribly. They're doing it like clowns. They can't even pull off a proper media operation.
Yes, not even that. Eduardo Vior's show started 2 minutes ago, so join us over there on DMP Geopolitics, our sister channel. The link is below with a rebroadcast here. Remember that we reactivated our TikTok channel with short clips. Please support us on DMP, short for Dying Myths in English. The link is also below in the description. And on December 15th, Eduardo Vior will have a gathering with supporters at El Pulque in Buenos Aires at 6 p.m. Everyone's invited, free admission. And tomorrow the talk with Juan Antonio, the Friday one. Tomorrow. Fernando, my friend, my voice can't take it anymore.
Fernando querido, mi voz no puede más, amigo.
Vale, yo me tengo que despedir con...
All right, I have to say goodbye. I can't resist it with another bad joke. I'm sorry, it's the price the demolishers have to pay for putting up with me here. But come on, you have to watch these short films, because I'm a specialist in shorts, since I'm short.
I don't know if your jokes are so bad they're actually good, Fernando.
Yes, well, it's just that I can't help saying those silly things.
Comrade, see you Friday with your show, and on Sunday we'll be around here. Thank you very much. As always, demolishers, see you tomorrow. And now, everyone with Eduardo Vior, a hug. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Yeah.